Dr. Solomon Adeyemi stood in the heart of the bustling city of Telos. The sun, an artificial star that powered the massive domed structure surrounding the metropolis, shone brightly, casting a golden hue over the sprawling city. The skyline was a tapestry of futuristic glass spires and sleek hovercrafts darting between them. Yet despite the technological marvels surrounding him, Solomon's thoughts were with the past, with his roots, with his ancestors. His clinic, nestled in the core of Telos, was a blend of cutting-edge bioengineering and traditional African wisdom. The walls were adorned with intricate beadwork, abstract sculptures of the ancestral spirits, and paintings of his family lineage, generations of healers, thinkers, and warriors. Despite the futuristic advancements that existed in the city, he made sure to keep the connection to his heritage alive. His ancestors' wisdom was the core of his work. It was in their traditions that he found the answers when technology failed. Dr. Adeyemi, Mariama's voice broke his reverie. She was his assistant, a bright and ambitious young woman who shared both his vision for blending the old with the new and his commitment to helping others. "You have a visitor, an urgent one." Solomon's brow furrowed. He had been expecting patients from various alien species, but none had made appointments. He followed Mariama through the gleaming hallways of the clinic, which seemed to hum with life, an energy field powered by the synergy of organic and mechanical processes. The patient who waited was an alien, but not one Solomon had encountered before. His skin shimmered like polished obsidian, and his eyes glowed with a soft silver light. The alien's posture was proud, but there was a palpable desperation in his gaze. "Are you Dr. Solomon Adeyemi?" The alien's voice was deep, yet carried an air of urgency. "I am," Solomon responded, his voice calm and steady. He studied the alien carefully, trying to assess the situation. The being before him was clearly not human, but the essence of his suffering was universal. "My name is Thalok," the alien continued. "I come from the planet Xantar. My son is dying. His heart has failed, and the medical sciences of my people are insufficient to save him. I have heard of your expertise. I need your help." Solomon nodded slowly, his mind already calculating the logistics of the situation. He had worked with many alien species, each with their unique biology, but the challenge of Xantar biology would not be easy. Still, he felt something stir within him, an obligation not just as a healer, but as a representative of his people, his culture. "Bring him here," Solomon said. His voice was calm, but his mind raced. There was little time, every moment counted. Thalok led him to a back room where the child lay on a bio-bed, its faint breathing the only sign of life. The child was small, fragile, with translucent skin that pulsed rhythmically in time with the weak heartbeat. Solomon's heart sank. The child's heart was barely functioning. The situation was dire, and Solomon knew that time was running out. He approached the child with a steady hand, placing his fingers gently on the small alien's chest. His mind raced through various options. He had no doubt that technology could save the child, but this wasn't just a matter of technology. It was a matter of trust. Trust that the alien father, Thalok, would allow him to use methods that weren't native to Xantar culture, methods that blended human bioengineering with something much deeper, something that Solomon believed could bridge the gaps between their two worlds. "I need access to your planet's genetic archives," Solomon said, turning to Thalok. "I'll need information on your species' biology, specifically your heart's cellular structure." Thalok hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously between Solomon and the child. "Our archives are restricted. Only the highest-ranking officials have access." Solomon took a deep breath, holding back his frustration. "I am not asking for political favor, Thalok. I am asking for the life of your child. I cannot help without it." After a long pause, Thalok's eyes softened. "You have no idea how much this means. I will grant you access." He turned to one of the guards who had followed him into the room, a tall figure draped in ornate armor. "Give him access to the archives now." The guard nodded, and within moments Solomon had all the genetic data he needed. The data was dense and difficult to understand at first glance, but Solomon's mind was adept at parsing complex patterns. The work would be difficult, but not impossible. "I will begin immediately," Solomon said, already turning to the nearby workstation to start his calculations. But as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this visit than just a medical emergency. Thalek's desperation was clear, but there was something else, something unspoken. Solomon had to stay focused. There was no room for distractions. The child's life was in his hands. The sterile, high-tech environment of the clinic contrasted sharply with the intense emotional atmosphere that filled the room. Doctor. Solomon Adeyemi stood over the child, his mind focused and methodical, yet his heart heavy with the weight of the responsibility placed upon him. The small Xantar child lay motionless on the biobed, its fragile form flickering in and out of life, its heartbeat barely detectable. Solomon's eyes darted between the glowing holograms projected above the child's body, scanning the data from the Xantar genetic archive that had just been transferred to his system. He had seen life and death situations before, but there was something about this one that made his pulse quicken. The child's heart was failing. And the alien father, Thalek, was watching him with silent urgency, his obsidian eyes glowing softly in the dim light of the clinic. Thalek's presence in the room was imposing, yet there was an unmistakable vulnerability in his stance. He was the representative of a race known for its strength and longevity, yet here he was, standing on the edge of despair, hoping that a human might save his only child. Solomon glanced at the holographic projections again, carefully studying the intricate details of the alien's biology. The Xantar heart was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't just a simple organ. It was an intricate network of bioelectric systems that were intertwined with the very essence of the Xantar being. This wasn't just a medical challenge, it was a cultural one. Solomon knew that if he failed, it would be more than a lost life. It could spark an intergalactic incident. Failure wasn't an option. "I've never worked with Xantar biology before," Solomon said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension. "I'll need time to study the data and design a suitable replacement for your son's heart." Thalek didn't answer immediately. His gaze never left the child's fragile form, and for a moment, Solomon wondered if the alien was holding back tears. It was hard to tell. Xantar facial expressions were subtle, their emotions often masked beneath their stoic demeanor. But the father's worry was palpable. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "I don't have time," Thalek said finally, his voice low but insistent. "His heart will fail completely within hours. If you cannot fix him, I will lose him." Solomon felt the weight of those words settle over him. It wasn't just about science anymore. It was about survival, hope, and a father's love for his child. He took a deep breath and nodded, trying to steady his nerves. This wasn't the first time he had been under pressure, but it was certainly one of the most delicate situations he had faced. "I'll do everything I can," Solomon said, the determination in his voice more pronounced now. He turned back to the child, his fingers hovering over the holographic controls that would begin the delicate process of creating a synthetic heart. He was interrupted by Mariama's voice, soft but urgent, calling from the doorway. "Doctor." "Adeyemi, you need to see this." Solomon looked up, his brow furrowing in concern. "What is it?" Mariama stepped into the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and concern. "You've got company. There are Xantar royal guards outside. They're demanding to speak with you." Solomon's stomach dropped. The last thing he needed right now was a confrontation with Xantar authorities. But he knew this was only the beginning. If he succeeded in saving the child, there would be many questions. Questions about how a human had been able to do what the best Xantar doctors could not. And if he failed, the consequences would be even worse. "They're not here for a simple consultation, are they?" Solomon muttered under his breath, his mind racing. He needed to focus. The child needed him. But the looming presence of the guards added another layer of pressure. Thalek turned toward the door at the mention of the guards, his face hardening. "I told you. I'm the only one who can bring a human to our world. The Xantar do not trust outsiders, and they will not tolerate any interference in their affairs. If they learn that you're attempting to save my son—" "I know," Solomon interrupted, his voice steady but strained. "I'll deal with it. First, I need to stabilize your son. After that, we'll figure out what comes next." He looked down at the child once more, taking in a deep breath. This was no longer just about saving a life. This was about diplomacy, trust, and a delicate balance between science and culture. Solomon could feel the eyes of the galaxy on him, even if only metaphorically. The future of human and Xantar relations might rest on the outcome of this moment. The sound of footsteps approaching the clinic's entrance grew louder. Solomon's pulse quickened. The guards were getting closer. But for now there was only one thing he could focus on: the child, and he would do whatever it took to save him. Dr. Solomon Adeyemi's fingers hovered over the holographic interface, his eyes scanning the complex data that surrounded him. The biological patterns of the Xantar heart were intricate, a web of bioelectric impulses and neural pathways that formed the core of their existence. For a moment he felt a pang of doubt. Could he truly recreate something so vital, so uniquely alien, with the tools at his disposal? The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the machines in the background, their lights flickering with the steady rhythm of advanced technology. The scent of sterile metal and ozone filled the air, but Solomon was focused on the task ahead. The child's fragile form lay still in the bed beside him, connected to the various monitoring systems that hummed quietly, keeping track of the failing heart. "Come on, Solomon," he muttered to himself. "You've done this before. You've repaired hearts. You've rebuilt entire systems from scratch. This is no different." But it was. The Xantar heart wasn't just a biological organ, it was a symbol of their race's essence. A failure here could mean more than just the loss of a life. It could mean political unrest, a breach in intergalactic diplomacy, and a fracture in the fragile trust between humans and the Xantar. He tapped a few keys, and a new data stream appeared in front of him, one that contained the blueprint for the Xantar heart, complete with the genetic variations that allowed it to survive in their hostile environment. Solomon's fingers moved quickly across the interface, pulling up the bioengineering simulations that would help him design a synthetic replacement. His assistant, Mariama, stood off to the side, watching silently. Solomon knew she was just as concerned as he was, but she trusted his skills. They had worked together on countless projects, and she had always believed in his ability to find solutions, no matter how impossible they seemed. She wasn't one to speak unless she had something important to say, but Solomon could feel her eyes on him, her quiet support a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this. The Xantar heart was structured unlike any other Solomon had seen. It wasn't just a pump. It was a living entity, a bioelectric organ capable of generating its own electromagnetic field. The Xantar species used it to communicate, to bond with one another, even to interact with their environment. This was no simple organ transplant. It would take something extraordinary to mimic this level of complexity. "How do you feel about using the gene sequencing software to adapt the existing DNA?" Mariama asked, breaking the silence. "It could help us model the heart's electromagnetic properties more accurately." Solomon paused, considering her suggestion. It was a good one. The software could allow him to simulate the exact traits of the Xantar heart, but he would still need to account for the unique environmental factors that affected their biology. "That might work," Solomon replied, leaning in closer to the screen. "But I'll need to analyze how their genetic code interacts with their environmental conditions. The energy field they generate. It's not something we can replicate with just basic genetic sequencing." "Right," Mariama said, nodding thoughtfully. "But we could use bioelectric materials. Something like the new graphene synth, combined with a bioresonance generator." Solomon smiled slightly at the suggestion. "Graphene, huh? That's an interesting approach. I like it." The two of them fell into a rhythm as they worked, their thoughts interwoven with the same goal in mind: saving the child's life. Solomon couldn't help but think about the long road that had brought him here, the sacrifices his people had made, the battles they had fought for survival. And now, standing at the precipice of this new frontier, he felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy bearing down on him. He activated a series of tests, adjusting the frequency of the electromagnetic pulse to match the signature of a healthy Xantar heart. The simulation began. The digital model of the heart, slowly forming in front of him. It was a beautiful sight, complex and elegant, the neural pathways linking together in perfect harmony. "Almost there," Solomon muttered, his voice barely audible as he focused intently on the screen. "Just a little more precision." But as he adjusted the settings, something caught his attention, an anomaly in the data stream. He frowned, leaning closer to the screen. The Xantar heart wasn't reacting in the way he expected. The bioelectric field was unstable, shifting unpredictably. Solomon's heart raced. This was the danger of working with alien biology. One misstep could lead to catastrophic failure. "What is it?" Mariama asked, sensing his tension. "Something's wrong," Solomon said, his voice tight. "The field is fluctuating too much. I need to recalibrate the energy matrix." Before he could finish his sentence, a sharp beep echoed through the room. The child's vital signs were weakening. Solomon's pulse quickened. The time for experimentation was over. He had to act now. "Mariama, help me," Solomon barked. His fingers flew over the controls, adjusting the settings on the fly. "I need that graphene synth now." Mariama rushed to the side table, grabbing the materials and handing them to Solomon, as he worked furiously to stabilize the child's heart. There was no room for error. Every decision, every move, had to be perfect. The Xantar father Thalok stood silent in the background, watching them with a mix of hope and dread. Solomon knew that if he didn't succeed now, it would be too late. The room was thick with tension. Dr. Solomon Adeyemi stood at the center of the sterile medical facility, sweat beading on his brow as he worked furiously to stabilize the failing Xantar heart. The quiet hum of the advanced medical equipment around him seemed almost suffocating in the silence that had settled after his frantic commands. The child's pulse had stabilized, but the delicate work wasn't over yet. Thalok, the alien father, paced back and forth, his dark obsidian skin rippling with every step. His silver eyes were sharp, watching Solomon's every move with a mixture of hope and distrust. There was an invisible wall between them, one forged not by Solomon's lack of skill, but by centuries of cultural and racial barriers. Even in this desperate situation, there was an unspoken question in Thalok's mind. Why had a human been chosen to help his child? Why had a species that had suffered so much at the hands of alien conquerors earned the right to stand in the gap between life and death for his kin? "I don't understand," Thalok's voice broke the silence, deep and heavy, as he approached the bed where his son lay. "How can you, a human, know enough to save my son? We are a proud race, and our way of life is not yours to interfere with." Solomon paused for a moment, glancing at Thalok with a deep, understanding gaze. He could feel the weight of those words, the implied judgment. It wasn't just the Xantar child's life at stake. This was a clash of cultures, of history, of deeply ingrained beliefs about who had the right to wield power over life and death. "I didn't come here to interfere with your way of life," Solomon said, his voice calm but firm. "I came because your son is dying, and I can help save him. My methods may be different, but I'm not here to take anything from you or your people. I'm here to offer my skills, my knowledge, and right now that's all that matters." Thalok's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into his gaze. He didn't trust Solomon. Could he? How could he trust a species that had been enslaved, colonized, and fought for survival on a galaxy-wide scale? Humans were too new to space, too raw in their power, to be trusted with such delicate matters. Solomon stood his ground, watching the alien father carefully. He understood the distrust. He had seen it before in his own people. The hesitation, the lingering fear of being judged or exploited by other races. He had felt that same distrust when the human race was first introduced to the galactic community. And yet, here he was, standing in the middle of it, trying to bridge a gap that felt wider than any star system. "You don't have to trust me," Solomon continued, his tone softer now. "But you have to trust that I'm doing everything I can to save your son. That's all I can offer." Thalok didn't speak for a long time, his thoughts clearly torn between his desperation to save his child and the deep-seated skepticism that was rooted in his culture. He wanted to believe Solomon, but how could he? How could a human be the one to save his son when his own people, who had known the Xantar for millennia, had failed? "I will help you," Thalok finally said, his voice laced with reluctant resolve. "But know this, human. I am doing this because of my son, not because I trust you." Solomon nodded, acknowledging the alien's feelings without anger or resentment. It wasn't about trust. It was about action. The child's heart was still failing, still too weak to survive without the intervention Solomon was preparing. The artificial heart was close to completion, but the final adjustments required the finest touch. It wasn't just about biology. It was about understanding the intricacies of the Xantar's relationship with their biology, their environment, and their culture. "Thank you," Solomon said quietly. "We can save him." The Xantar father stood silently for a moment, looking down at his son, his face hard and unreadable. He was fighting something inside, battling a fear and a pride that Solomon couldn't fully comprehend. In the silence that followed, Solomon couldn't help but wonder, was this just about saving a life, or was it about something bigger? Was this a moment of true change, where two species, once strangers to one another, could find common ground through empathy, through the shared experience of loss, and through the gift of life? "Do what you must, human," Thalok finally said, his voice quieter now, "but understand that this will not be forgotten. If you succeed, you will have earned something far greater than the gratitude of one father." Solomon turned back to the child's still body, his mind focused once more on the task ahead. The barriers between them, cultural, racial, historical, would not be broken easily. But saving this child, saving this life, could be the first step toward something greater. And Solomon was determined to see it through. As he adjusted the final settings on the artificial heart, the weight of the moment hung heavily on him. Thalok watched silently, his earlier distrust tempered by the vulnerability that only a father's love could bring. And in that silence, the first real crack in the wall between them began to form. The artificial heart pulsed faintly on the biotable, its rhythm slow but steady, a synthetic echo of life. Dr. Solomon Adeyemi exhaled, his hands trembling slightly. The long hours of labor were catching up to him, yet his focus remained unbroken. Every element of the design had been a gamble, an experimental fusion of human bioengineering and the alien principles he had barely begun to understand. Beside him, Mariama adjusted the monitor readings. "Pulse synchronization at 70%, she said, her voice calm but taut with concentration. "If this keeps up, we might actually pull it off." Solomon glanced at the alien child lying before them. Its translucent skin shimmered faintly under the sterile lights, the faint glow of its veins fading in and out. The child's breathing was shallow, barely perceptible, but there was still a spark of life, a fragile thread that Solomon was determined not to let snap. "We don't have time to celebrate yet," Solomon muttered. His eyes darted between the data streams, watching the biofeedback loop stabilize. The interface must integrate perfectly with the neural matrix. If it rejects the core, the heart will fail. Thalok stood at a distance, his massive frame motionless, his eyes locked on the small body of his son. The Xantar warrior who had once spoken with command now looked stripped of his authority, stripped of everything except raw, aching fear. "If this doesn't work," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, "what happens to him?" Solomon looked up from the controls, meeting the alien's gaze. "Then we try again," he said firmly, "but I'm not planning to fail." The room fell silent again, the only sounds the rhythmic beeps of the monitors and the faint hum of the medical systems. Solomon's hands moved instinctively, guided by both science and something deeper, something ancestral. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "Healing is not just of the flesh, Solomon. It is the spirit speaking to the body." As the integration reached its final stage, the child's body convulsed once, violently before falling still. Mariama's hand shot to the console. "Heart rate dropping," she said, panic rising in her tone. "It's rejecting the implant." Solomon's jaw clenched. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." He moved quickly, overriding the system's safety protocols. He had designed a failsafe, a final measure that relied not on programming but on energy resonance. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the harmonics he had recorded earlier. the subtle frequencies of the Xantar heart when it was alive. "Mariama," he said softly, "bring up the resonance emitter." "Solomon, that's experimental." "I know," he interrupted. "Do it anyway." She hesitated only for a second before activating the emitter. The room filled with a low rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate in the bones, deep and resonant. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was almost musical, echoing like a heartbeat carried through time. Solomon remembered the stories from his ancestors, of healers who sang over the sick, whose voices wove life back into those who had none. He began to hum, softly at first, then with purpose. A deep resonant tone that aligned with the frequency. Mariama joined him, her voice steadying his rhythm. The Xantar father watched in stunned silence as the room seemed to pulse in harmony. The monitors flickered. The synthetic heart twitched. Then, slowly, impossibly, it began to beat again. Mariama's eyes widened. "It's working," she breathed. "It's actually working." The readings stabilized, the child's vitals climbing back into normal range. Solomon opened his eyes, the relief washing over him like a tide. "Stay with us," he whispered to the child. "Come on, little one, stay with us." Thalak stepped forward, his expression torn between disbelief and reverence. His gaze shifted from Solomon to his son, then back again. "What did you do?" he asked. Solomon hesitated, his voice quiet. "I gave him rhythm," he said, "something both our species understand." Thalak looked down at his son, whose chest now rose and fell steadily. The faint glow of life returned to the boy's veins, pulsing in sync with the artificial heart. For a moment the proud alien warrior's composure cracked. His voice trembled when he spoke. "You've done what our own physicians could not." Solomon nodded but didn't smile. "He's stable for now, but it's too early to call it a success. We'll monitor him for the next 24 hours. Mariama placed a gentle hand on Solomon's shoulder. "You should rest." "Later," he said quietly. His eyes stayed on the child. "Not until I know he's safe." Thalak's gaze softened, but the unease in his posture remained. Gratitude warred with fear, fear of what this act might mean, of what his people would think, and deep in Solomon's gut, he felt it too. This was only the beginning. The soft hum of the heart echoed in the sterile air, a promise, a warning, and a fragile symbol of something greater than either of their species could yet understand. The quiet triumph in the room was short-lived. The faint rhythm of the artificial heart filled the air like a fragile promise. Steady, delicate, alive. "Doctor." Solomon Adeyemi stood by the bedside, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The child's vitals glowed steady blue on the monitor. For the first time in hours, Solomon allowed himself a slow exhale. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the metallic corridor outside the clinic. Not the steady rhythm of staff or patients. This was heavier, deliberate, militarized. Mariama froze mid-motion, her eyes flicking toward the door. "Do you hear that?" she asked quietly. Solomon straightened, frowning. "Yes." Before either of them could speak again, the clinic's entrance slid open with a sharp hiss. A wave of cold air swept through as three towering figures stepped inside, each clad in ornate armor that shimmered with gold and black. Their helmets, carved with the crest of Xantar's royal family, gleamed under the clinic's sterile light. Thalak stiffened instantly, his massive shoulders squared, his hands curling into fists. "Royal guards," he muttered, his voice thick with dread. Solomon's gaze darted between the guards and Thalak. "Friends of yours?" "No," Thalak said sharply. "Not friends." "Enforcers." The lead guard stepped forward, his voice deep and commanding. "Dr. Solomon Adeyemi of Earth," he said, each word clipped and deliberate. "By decree of the Xantar Royal Command, you are ordered to cease all medical procedures on the young Prince Kale immediately." Solomon's heart sank. He exchanged a look with Mariama, who stood frozen by the bio-table. The child, the prince, still lay unconscious, the synthetic heart pulsing steadily in his chest. "Prince," Solomon repeated, his voice quiet. "You never said—" Thalak's jaw tightened. I didn't think it would matter if he died before you finished. The lead guard's gaze turned to Thalak, cold and sharp. You have broken royal protocol, Thalak. You exposed the heir to alien experimentation. The penalty for such an act— I did what your healers could not, Thalak interrupted, his voice breaking through the tension. Would you rather let him die than accept help from a human? The guard's expression didn't waver. Our laws are clear. Solomon's mind raced. He had just saved a life, a child's life, and now he stood accused of violating laws he didn't even know existed. His instinct told him to reason, but the rigid posture of the guards left no doubt. They weren't here for discussion. Listen, Solomon began, keeping his tone calm but firm. I didn't come here to break your laws or challenge your traditions. I was asked to save a life, and I did, that's all. You tampered with royal blood, the lead guard replied, his tone sharp. You have altered what was sacred. Mariama stepped forward, her voice steady. He didn't alter anything. He saved him. That child was dying. You should be thanking him, not threatening him. The second guard raised his weapon slightly, the faint hum of energy resonating in the air. Careful, human. Solomon's pulse quickened, but he didn't step back. If gratitude is too much to ask, I'll settle for understanding, he said. His eyes locked on the lead guards. But I'm not undoing the procedure. That heart is the only thing keeping your prince alive. A tense silence followed. The low hum of the machines filled the space between them, amplifying every heartbeat. Thalak moved closer to his son, protective and defiant. The lead guard's gaze flicked toward the child. His armored hand hovered near his weapon, then lowered. You claim the child lives because of your work? Solomon nodded once. Check for yourself. The guard turned his head slightly, motioning to one of his subordinates. The younger guard stepped forward, scanning the child's vitals with a flick of his wrist. The holographic readings appeared mid-air, displaying perfect rhythm, stable oxygen levels, a steady pulse. It's true, the young guard said quietly. The prince lives. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the leader's expression. Impossible, he murmured. Thalak's voice rose again, this time steadier, stronger. You see, the human did what none of your finest could. He saved my son. If you arrest him, you dishonor the child's life. The leader's jaw tightened beneath his helmet. His authority was being challenged, and by one of his own. But the evidence before him could not be denied. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. You will come with us, Dr. Adeyemi. The Royal Council will decide your fate. Solomon exhaled slowly, glancing once at Mariama, then at the sleeping child. The steady heartbeat on the monitor was both a victory and a curse. If that's what it takes to keep him alive, Solomon said quietly, then I'll go. Thalak met his gaze, his voice low but resolute. You saved my son. I won't let them destroy you for it. But even as he spoke, Solomon knew things were far from over. The heartbeat that echoed through the sterile air might have saved a life, but it had just ignited something much larger. The metallic hum of the transport echoed through the chamber as Dr. Solomon Adeyemi sat in restrained silence, his wrists cuffed with magnetic bands that pulsed faintly. The air was cold, almost sterile, but heavy with unspoken tension. Across from him stood Thalak, unbound, towering but grim. The guards surrounded them, silent, disciplined, their armor gleaming beneath the dim lights. No one spoke. No one dared. Mariama sat beside Solomon, her gaze fixed on the floor, her jaw tight. He could feel her frustration radiating off her like static. We saved a life, she whispered. And this is the thanks we get. Solomon didn't answer immediately. His mind was still replaying the rhythm of that artificial heart, the pulse that had meant victory mere hours ago. Now, it felt like a crime. They're not angry that we saved him, Solomon said finally, his voice low. They're angry because of what it means. A human changed something sacred to them. That's not just medicine, it's blasphemy. Thalak turned sharply, his expression torn between pride and guilt. You must understand, Doctor. The Xantar heart isn't only an organ, it's what connects us to our world. to our ancestors. It is believed to be a living link between body and soul. For you to recreate it, his voice faltered. Some will see it as defiance of the gods, Mariama scoffed. Defiance? We fought death with science. If that's defiance, then maybe your gods need to evolve. One of the guards stepped forward, his weapon raised slightly. Silence, human, he snapped. Solomon's tone remained calm, measured. She means no disrespect, he said. But maybe this is what progress looks like, when belief meets knowledge and learns to coexist. The lead guard, the same one who had accused him earlier, turned his head slightly. You speak as though your kind understands balance, yet your species destroys worlds in the name of progress. The accusation stung and Solomon's gaze dropped for a moment. Maybe you're right, he said softly. But every people has to choose what they become after their mistakes. I didn't come here to prove humanity's greatness. I came to prove our compassion. A quiet settled over them. Even the hum of the ship seemed to fade for a moment. Thalak's eyes softened, his posture no longer defensive. Compassion, he repeated. That is what my son felt when you touched him. Even unconscious, he responded. That is not something one can fake. Before Solomon could respond, the ship jolted. They had arrived. The door slid open to reveal a vast hall bathed in golden light. The air smelled faintly of ozone and incense. Massive columns stretched toward the ceiling, each engraved with the history of the Xantar people. The guards led Solomon and Mariama through the hall toward a raised platform where three robed figures stood, the royal council. The eldest among them, a tall figure with pale, glowing eyes, regarded Solomon with an expression that was both curious and severe. You are the human doctor, he said, his voice resonant. You claim to have saved the life of our prince. I don't claim it, Solomon replied. I did. Murmurs rippled through the hall. The councilman's gaze narrowed. Do you understand what you have done? The heart is sacred. It is the vessel of our spirit. You have replaced it with a machine. Solomon took a slow breath. He could feel Mariama's hand tighten on his arm. No, he said. I didn't replace it. I honored it. I studied your people's biology, your culture, your traditions. I built a heart that beats with the same rhythm as yours. It doesn't defy your spirit. It preserves it. The second counselor, a woman with silver markings on her skin, tilted her head. You speak as though you understand faith. I don't need to understand it to respect it, Solomon answered. My ancestors believed that science and spirit walk the same path, that one reveals what the other cannot. Maybe that's true here too. The first counselor fell silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, You speak well, human. But words are easy. You will be tested not in strength but in belief. Solomon frowned. Tested how? Thalak stepped forward, his voice strained. The trial of the heart. They will ask you to prove that what you made is not a desecration. If you fail, both you and my son will die. Mariama's breath caught. Solomon met Thalak's gaze, seeing both fear and faith in the alien's eyes. Then I'll pass, Solomon said quietly, because I didn't come here to break your beliefs. I came to remind you what compassion looks like. The counselor's eyes glowed brighter. We will see, human. The guard stepped forward again, separating Solomon from Mariama. As they led him deeper into the golden chamber, the sound of his footsteps echoed like a heartbeat, steady, defiant, alive. And somewhere beyond the chamber walls, the young prince's artificial heart beat in perfect rhythm. The chamber of the royal council had fallen silent after Solomon's declaration. The air shimmered faintly with the energy that filled the Xantar capital, a constant living pulse that seemed to echo from the very walls. Yet beneath that steady rhythm, tension rippled like an undercurrent. Solomon stood before the council, wrist still bound, the faint hum of his restraints cutting through the silence. The eldest counselor's voice broke the stillness. You speak of compassion as though it were enough to mend what you have done. But the heart you built, can it truly sustain the life of one born of Xantar blood? Or will it fail when our world's energy rejects it? Solomon met his gaze without flinching. If it fails, it means I failed to understand your people. But if it endures, It proves something greater, that humanity can create not to conquer, but to preserve. A murmur spread through the gathered council members. Mariama, still restrained near the hall's entrance, whispered a silent prayer under her breath. She had seen that look in Solomon's eyes before, steady, relentless, filled with a quiet fire that refused to bend even under threat. The youngest of the councillors rose, her silvery markings glowing faintly. "Very well," she said. "Let the human prove his words. Bring the prince." The guards exchanged uneasy glances before one of them left the chamber. The wait was agonizing. Solomon's heart pounded, but his thoughts stayed focused on the child, the delicate structure of the synthetic heart, the calibration of its rhythm, the hope that his creation could withstand what was coming. When the doors finally opened, the child was carried in, his frail body resting in a suspension cradle that shimmered with soft blue light. The artificial heart beat within him, steady but fragile. Thalak followed close behind, his expression a storm of fear and pride. "Your creation has held thus far," said the eldest councillor, "but our test is not of endurance alone. We will expose the prince to the core pulse, the energy that binds all Xantar life. If your device withstands its resonance, we will accept that you have not violated our sacred laws." Solomon's stomach tightened. The core pulse. He'd read about it briefly in the Xantar archives, a living energy field that connected every being on the planet, an electromagnetic flow that could synchronize with native biology. But the heart he built wasn't designed to interact with an entire planetary field. It was calibrated for one life, one body. He turned to Thalak. "If the pulse is too strong, it could overload the circuits." "The energy might—" Thalak interrupted, his tone firm but quiet. "I trust you, Doctor. You saved my son once. Save him again." Those words carried weight, trust that defied fear, faith that transcended species. Solomon nodded, his jaw set. "Then I'll do everything I can." The council initiated the sequence. The air vibrated as the chamber's lights dimmed, and a low hum filled the space. The prince's cradle began to glow, threads of luminous energy coiling around him like ethereal vines. Solomon's pulse quickened as he saw the readings spike across the monitor, bioelectric surges stronger than anything he had ever encountered. "Pulse increasing," Mariama warned, her voice trembling. "Solomon, it's pushing the limits." "I know," he said, his voice low but resolute. "But don't stop it. The system needs to adapt." The hum deepened and the child's small body convulsed. The heart flickered, its glow dimming, then brightening erratically. Solomon clenched his fists. "Come on," he whispered. "Breathe with it. Feel it. Sync with the rhythm." The pulse intensified, and suddenly the artificial heart emitted a deep, resonant tone, one that matched the frequency of the core itself. The readings stabilized. The light around the prince changed from blue to gold, his body relaxing as if in perfect harmony with the energy. Gasps rippled through the council chamber. Even the eldest councillor leaned forward, awe flickering in his ancient eyes. "Impossible," he breathed. "The core accepts it." Solomon exhaled shakily, relief washing through him like a wave. He turned to Thalak, who stood frozen, eyes glistening. "You see," Solomon said softly. "Life doesn't care where it's built from, only that it continues." But as the glow faded, one of the monitors flashed a warning. The heart's energy readings were spiking, too high. The connection was too strong. Mariama's eyes widened. "It's feeding off the core. If it doesn't stabilize, it'll burn out." Solomon's pulse surged. He knew he had seconds, maybe less, to find a balance between the synthetic and the spiritual. He closed his eyes, remembering the harmonic frequency he had used during the operation, the hum of ancient songs, the rhythm of his ancestors. He began to hum again, low and steady. The vibrations spread and gradually the readings leveled. The lights dimmed back to normal. The heart's glow settled into a calm, steady pulse. When Solomon opened his eyes, the prince was breathing peacefully. The councillors exchanged silent glances. The eldest finally spoke, his tone softer now. "Perhaps there is more wisdom in humanity than we allowed ourselves to believe." Solomon said nothing. He was too focused on the soft beat that filled the hall, a rhythm that now belonged to two worlds. And somewhere deep within him, he knew this wasn't the end of the challenge. It was only the beginning. The chamber's silence after the test was suffocating. The golden light that had once pulsed around the prince faded into a steady glow. He lived. His chest rose and fell with calm precision, the rhythm of the synthetic heart in perfect harmony with the core pulse. Yet instead of relief, Solomon felt the weight of eyes upon him, hundreds of them, filled with awe, fear, and something darker, suspicion. The eldest counselor stepped forward, his long robes trailing across the polished floor. "You have done what no Xantar has done," he said slowly. "So you forged a bridge between the mechanical and the divine, but such power cannot exist without consequence." Solomon met his gaze, exhaustion evident in his posture, but defiance in his eyes. "I didn't come here for power. I came here to save a child. Yet in doing so," the counselor continued, "you may have changed the balance of our world." The crowd murmured, the tension thickening like static in the air. Thalok stood between Solomon and the council, his voice rising in defense. "You speak of balance, yet you allowed your own ignorance to nearly kill my son. Would you condemn the man who saved him just to preserve your pride?" The counselor's eyes flashed. "Mind your tone, Thalok. Your defiance is what brought this dishonor upon us." Thalok's fists clenched, but Solomon reached out subtly, his voice calm. "Let him speak his truth, he's right." He turned back to the council. "I didn't just save your prince. I proved that your faith and my science can coexist. You can cling to fear or you can learn from this." The words echoed, bold and raw. Mariama's heart pounded from where she stood beside the guards. She could see the divide forming among the counselors, some leaning forward with curiosity, others recoiling in indignation. The youngest counselor spoke softly, her voice cutting through the noise. "Perhaps the doctor speaks with reason. The core accepted his creation. That cannot be ignored." But the eldest's tone hardened. "Or perhaps the core was deceived. Machines can mimic life, but they cannot possess it. What if he has corrupted the sacred energy itself?" The accusation struck like a blow. The guards shifted uneasily. Thalok's voice thundered, "Enough, you would rather bury yourselves in fear than face the truth before your eyes." The eldest raised a hand, silencing him. "If the core truly accepts this abomination, then let it prove so in full. Bring the child closer to the heart of Xantar. If he survives its pulse, we will accept this creation. If he fails, both he and the human perish." Mariama's breath caught. "You can't be serious." Solomon's jaw tightened. "If that's what it takes to end this, then I'll do it." Thalok turned to him, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You don't owe them this." "I owe your son a chance to live free of their fear," Solomon replied quietly. "That's enough." Moments later they stood before the heart, a radiant sphere of molten gold suspended in a field of energy. Its pulse filled the vast chamber, deep and resonant, like the heartbeat of a planet. The child was placed near it, the artificial heart glowing in response. Solomon's restraints had been removed, but he could feel the heat, the vibration seeping into his bones. The energy surged. The prince's vitals spiked, his small body arching under the force. Solomon reached out, channeling his focus, whispering under his breath the same harmonic hum that had once stabilized the child. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Find your rhythm." Mariama joined in, her low tone blending with his. The pulse of the heart began to synchronize with their hum. Slowly the child's body relaxed, his vitals normalized. The artificial heart glowed brighter, matching the rhythm of the core exactly. Gasps filled the room. Even the eldest counselor's expression faltered. The readings stabilized, then expanded, resonating across the entire chamber. Every Xantar felt the energy shift. The heart itself pulsed stronger, brighter, as if rejoicing. When it was over, the glow subsided, leaving silence. The prince slept peacefully, untouched. Solomon's voice broke the stillness. "There's your proof. Not a machine. Life. Not defiance. Harmony." The counselor bowed his head slowly, defeated. "Perhaps The core has chosen to teach us through you. Solomon's knees weakened from exhaustion, but he smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time we all started listening. As the guards lowered their weapons, the hum of the heart filled the silence again, no longer a threat, but a reminder that faith and knowledge, spirit and science, could indeed beat as one. And though peace settled over the hall, Solomon knew the real test had only begun. The days following the test were a blur of tension and whispers. The Xantar capital was alive with rumors, some calling Solomon a miracle worker, others a heretic. The royal council had yet to issue an official statement, leaving the city suspended between reverence and fear. Everywhere Solomon went, he could feel the weight of their gazes, admiration mixed with suspicion, hope intertwined with doubt. Inside the medical wing of the royal complex, the soft rhythm of the artificial heart filled the air like a quiet prayer. The young prince slept peacefully, his translucent skin glowing faintly with each pulse. Solomon stood beside the bed, studying the readings. They were perfect, stable, synchronized, alive. Still, something inside him refused to rest. "You haven't slept in 2 days," Mariama said, leaning against the doorway, her arms folded. Her voice carried the kind of warmth only someone who knew exhaustion intimately could give. "You'll collapse before the kid does." Solomon gave a tired smile. "I've done worse under pressure." "Yeah," she said, smirking faintly, "but not while under intergalactic surveillance." He chuckled softly, then looked back at the child. "You ever think about how strange this is? We spent years trying to prove humanity's worth to the galaxy, and now one child's heartbeat might change everything." Mariama's expression softened. "It's not strange," she said. "It's what we were meant to do, to remind them that our hands can heal as much as they can build." Before Solomon could reply, the doors hissed open. Thalak entered, his heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber. He looked different, worn, burdened. His armor was gone, replaced by ceremonial robes. The faint glow of the royal insignia shimmered across his chest. "How is he?" Thalak asked quietly. "Stable," Solomon said. "Better than I expected. The integration is perfect." Thalak's gaze lingered on his son. "You've done what our greatest healers could not. For that, I owe you more than words can express." Solomon inclined his head. "You don't owe me anything, I just did what was right." Thalak hesitated, his voice lowering. "You may not understand what you've ignited. The council debates still. Some see you as the hand of destiny, others as a threat to everything sacred." "I figured as much," Solomon said. "Faith doesn't change overnight." Thalak nodded slowly. "No, but it can evolve. My people need time." "And time," he added, looking Solomon directly in the eyes, "is something you may not have." The warning hung heavy in the air. Mariama stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "There are factions," Thalak said. "The old orders. They believe your creation defies the gods. They won't wait for the council's decision. They plan to act." Solomon felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Act how?" Thalak's expression hardened. "They mean to destroy what they see as unnatural. The prince and you." Mariama's voice sharpened. "We should leave, right now." "No," Solomon said firmly. "If we run, it proves them right. I didn't come this far to be a fugitive for saving a life." Thalak's voice broke through, low and tense. "This is not about pride, Doctor. These zealots believe death restores purity. They will not stop." Solomon looked at the boy again. The small, peaceful rise and fall of his chest. The quiet miracle of it. "Then we protect him," he said. "Together." Thalak's eyes narrowed, assessing him. "You would risk your life for a child not of your kind?" Solomon met his gaze without hesitation. "Life is life. Where we come from doesn't change that." For a moment the warrior said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "Then I will stand with you. But understand, if they come, they will come with fury." Mariama's tone softened. "So what's the plan?" Thalak's gaze shifted toward the great windows that overlooked the glowing skyline. "At dawn the council will meet again. If the prince's heart still beats in harmony with the core, the truth will be undeniable. But you must survive until then. A faint hum filled the air as the monitors flickered. Solomon glanced at the readings. Energy fluctuations, faint but noticeable. "Something's wrong," he murmured. Mariama moved closer. "What is it?" Solomon's eyes narrowed. "The core is shifting. Someone's interfering with the pulse network." Thalek's jaw tightened. "Then it has begun." The lights dimmed, the once steady hum of the heart monitor faltering for the briefest second. Solomon's chest tightened. Somewhere beyond the medical wing, distant alarms began to wail. The child stirred, his glow flickering. Mariama looked at Solomon, fear flashing in her eyes. "What do we do?" Solomon's answer came without hesitation. "We hold the line." The alarm echoed through the medical wing like a distant thunderclap, followed by the deep, unsettling hum of a system shutdown. Solomon's heart raced as he moved quickly to the child's bedside, his eyes darting to the monitors. The rhythmic pulse of the artificial heart flickered erratically, the once steady beat now wavering. "What's happening?" Mariama's voice trembled as she joined him, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and fear. "I don't know," Solomon muttered, his fingers flying across the controls trying to stabilize the readings. The core pulse was still fluctuating, but now it was worse. Distant interference was disrupting the system. His creation, his life-saving device, was beginning to fail. Thalek stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room with intensity. His hand rested on the hilt of his weapon. "They've begun," he said flatly. "The zealots. They're trying to disrupt the pulse network." "Can you stop them?" Solomon asked, not looking up from the monitors. "I can try," Thalek said, his voice low. "But their reach is far. The royal guard is loyal to the council, and many believe the prince's heart is a corruption." He looked at the child. "If they succeed, your work will be erased, and the prince will die." Solomon's jaw clenched. "Not while I'm here." He turned to the monitors once again, trying to find the source of the interference. The pulse was a complex network of energy, deeply woven into the fabric of Xantar's biology. It was supposed to be harmonious, but now it felt as though the entire system was being ripped apart. Mariama leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you fix it?" "I don't know," Solomon admitted, his fingers shaking as he worked. "I was never trained for this. I thought the core pulse was stable, integrated. There should have been no interference." Thalek's eyes darkened. "You are not the only one who believes that. There are those in the council who want your creation destroyed to preserve purity." He took a step closer. "You must understand, Doctor, the balance they believe in is fragile. They will not hesitate to erase you both." Solomon's mind raced. He couldn't lose the prince now, not after all they'd been through. The life they had built from a broken pulse was too precious. "We need to stabilize the system," Solomon said, taking a deep breath. "If I can reconnect the pulse to its source, if I can get it to resonate with the core again, we might have a chance." "You don't have the time," Thalek said. "If they're coming for us, they'll strike quickly. You'll need to leave now, while you still can." Solomon ignored him, his mind focused solely on the monitors. The artificial heart was still flickering, unstable. His heart beat in sync with the child's, every pulse growing weaker with each passing second. "Hold on," Solomon whispered, almost to himself. "I'm not leaving without you." Mariama moved behind him, watching him work, her hands trembling slightly. "What's our plan if this doesn't work?" "I won't let it fail," Solomon replied firmly, his voice steady, though the doubt gnawed at him. "I'll fight to the last. I can't let this be undone." Thalek stepped back, his eyes scanning the room one more time. He nodded, though there was no joy in it. "Then we'll stand by you. But know this, Doctor, if you fail, we fail together." The weight of his words hung in the air, thickening the already oppressive atmosphere. Solomon's mind flashed through 1,000 scenarios, but in each one he couldn't see failure. He had built this heart. He had given it life. There was no turning back. The heartbeat monitor flickered again. Solomon's hands moved faster, his mind working to reset the pulse. He needed to reattach the frequency, to stabilize it within the magnetic field that connected the core to the artificial heart. The energy in the room seemed to thrum with urgency, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. A sudden surge of feedback shook the room. Too much energy, too much strain. The child convulsed violently, his body arching off the bed as the artificial heart sparked and hummed with power. Solomon's heart stopped for a beat. "Mariama, help me," he shouted. Together, they worked to recalibrate the connection. Every second felt like an eternity, but slowly the oscillations began to smooth out. The pulse steadied. The monitors returned to normal. The artificial heart was holding strong. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last fluctuation disappeared. The prince's vitals were stable once more. Solomon exhaled sharply, slumping back in his chair, but the battle was far from over. Thalak's voice cut through the silence. "We must move quickly. The zealots will be here soon." Solomon nodded. "We're not done yet. But I'm not leaving this child behind. Not while he has a chance to live." The echo of footsteps in the hallway grew louder, each step deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to an inevitable end. Solomon stood at the child's bedside, his hands hovering over the control panel as he ran final diagnostics on the artificial heart. It had stabilized, but for how long? He wasn't sure. There were too many unknowns, too many forces at play, pulling in different directions. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the settings, ensuring the pulse resonated at the right frequency. Mariama stood beside him, her face drawn with concern. "How long do you think we have?" "Not long," Solomon replied, his voice tight. He couldn't mask the anxiety creeping into his chest. "The disruption is still there, but the heart's holding steady. If we can get through the next few hours, we'll have a chance." Thalak moved to the door, peering out into the dark hallway beyond. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the scent of fear and desperation. "They're coming," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of anger and resignation. "The zealots are here." Mariama's voice dropped, barely audible. "And what then?" Thalak turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Then we fight." Solomon's gaze hardened. "Not yet. I'm not going to risk anyone's life unless we have no choice. If they come for us, they'll come with force. They won't hesitate." Thalak nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "I know. But if they come for the prince, there will be no stopping them. I will die before they take him." Silence filled the room as they waited. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Solomon's mind raced through the possible outcomes, none of them good. He had no idea how far the zealots were willing to go to destroy what he had built, but the threat was real. He had seen the fanaticism in their eyes, the belief that their world needed to be purified. He had no doubt that they would stop at nothing to eliminate the corruption. The sound of boots clanging on metal floors cut through the quiet. Thalak's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "They're here." "Then it's time," Solomon said, his voice low. The door to the room opened, and several armed guards flooded in, their weapons raised. The zealots had arrived, and with them, the suffocating aura of power and control. The lead guard stepped forward, his eyes glowing with the intensity of his conviction. "This child," he said, his voice cold, "is an abomination. His heart was never meant to be replaced by a machine. You will return him to his rightful state, or we will do it for you." Solomon stood his ground, his fists clenched. "You don't understand. This child is alive because of what we've done. His heart is beating in harmony with the core. What you're asking for is murder." The guard's lips curled into a sneer. "You will not speak of things you don't understand, human. The core has been tampered with, and for that there will be consequences." Thalak stepped forward, his towering form blocking Solomon's view of the guards. "You do not speak for the core," he said, his voice thunderous. "I do. This is my son, and I will not let you destroy him." The guards hesitated, clearly thrown off by Thalak's defiance, but the leader's gaze never wavered. "Then you will both die for your defiance." Solomon's heart pounded in his chest. There was no way out of this. He had prepared for every possible scenario, but the reality of facing these zealots head-on was a different kind of pressure. He glanced at the child, peaceful, unaware, alive, and then back at Thalak. "We're not running," Solomon said firmly. We'll stand our ground. Thalak's eyes met his. There was a flicker of respect, of understanding before he nodded. At that moment, a low rumble shook the room. The lights flickered as the sound of distant explosions echoed through the walls. The Zealots had begun their attack. The core was being destabilized from within, and Solomon's work, their fight for survival, was about to reach its breaking point. The guards raised their weapons. Thalak's hand gripped the handle of his sword. Mariama stepped forward, her expression fierce. "We've come too far to give up now." Solomon took a deep breath, his pulse steadying for the first time in what felt like days. "Let them come." The door to the medical room slammed shut as the first round of shots rang out. The fight for the child's life, against the Zealots, the royal authority, and everything that sought to tear their fragile world apart, was beginning. The first shot rang out with a deafening crack, shattering the silence of the medical wing. Solomon's heart skipped a beat as he instinctively ducked, his hands protecting the child. The air filled with the acrid scent of ozone and burning metal, the weight of the chaos outside pressing against the fragile calm they had fought so hard to maintain. "Move!" Thalak barked, grabbing Solomon by the arm and pulling him toward the far corner of the room. The guards had already breached the door, their armored forms filling the space like a tidal wave, their weapons raised. Mariama was already in motion, moving to block the entrance, her face set in a determined mask. "We hold this ground," she said, her voice unwavering despite the obvious fear she felt. "We protect the prince." Solomon's mind raced as he adjusted his stance, keeping his body between the child and the incoming fire. He knew they didn't have much time. The disruption of the pulse network would only make things worse for the artificial heart, and if the guards destroyed their equipment, they would be left defenseless. "Thalok, can you buy us time?" Solomon shouted over the chaos, his voice steady but tense. Thalok glanced at the approaching guards, his hand still gripping the hilt of his weapon. "I can do better than that," he said with a grim smile. "But you need to finish what you started, Doctor." Solomon nodded, his fingers already moving across the console. "I need access to the pulse system. If I can reroute the frequencies, I can stabilize the heart remotely, but I need a distraction." Mariama glanced at the door, where the guards were advancing. "Leave that to me." She sprinted toward the entrance, her body moving like a fluid shadow, her mind calculating the next move. Solomon could see the steely determination in her eyes, the same determination that had carried her through so many of their trials. He knew she would give them the few precious moments they needed. Thalak readied his weapon, stepping into the doorway. "Don't make me regret this, Doctor," he said. "I'll give them a fight they won't forget." The battle erupted in full force. Blaster fire ricocheted off the walls, the room filled with smoke and the unmistakable clang of weapons striking armor. Solomon's pulse raced, but his focus never wavered. His fingers flew across the console as he accessed the pulse network's core functions. The frequencies were chaotic, broken, but there was a pattern, a thread he could follow. He began rerouting, aligning the frequencies with the artificial heart's rhythm, trying to restore the balance that had been shattered. Outside the room, the sounds of battle raged on. Solomon could hear Thalak's voice shouting commands, a roar of defiance mixed with the sharp crack of blaster fire. His heart raced, but he kept his focus, tuning into the pulse, manipulating the network to reassert control. Mariama's voice rang out over the chaos, her words urgent but calm. "We've bought you enough time. Finish it, Solomon." Solomon's hands flew across the controls, his mind locking into the rhythm of the pulse. The artificial heart began to stabilize, its erratic flickers gradually slowing to a more controlled beat. It was working just barely, but it was holding. Another blast slammed against the doorframe, and Solomon winced, knowing that they couldn't keep this up much longer. The pulse was stabilizing, but the real fight had just begun. He couldn't afford to let the Zealots break through. He couldn't afford to lose the child now, not when they were so close. He looked up, meeting Mariama's gaze across the room. She was breathless, her body tensed in preparation for whatever came next. Thalak was still holding his ground at the entrance, his stance unwavering as he fended off the advancing guards. "Almost there," Solomon muttered to himself. "Just a little longer." Thalak shouted over his shoulder, his voice gruff but filled with fierce loyalty. "Hurry, Doctor. We're not giving up this fight." Solomon's heart raced as he continued to adjust the frequencies, aligning the core with the artificial pulse. Every second felt like an eternity, but he knew they were on the edge of victory. The heart was almost fully synchronized with the core, the energy settling into harmony with the natural rhythm of Xantar life. Just as the last frequencies fell into place, the door shuddered violently. A blast struck the doorframe, sending debris flying. Solomon's body tensed, but he held firm, his focus on the child's heartbeat. A final, deafening crash erupted from the doorway as Thalok engaged the last of the attackers. The room was thick with smoke, but Solomon could hear the victorious shout as Thalok overpowered the last of the zealots. The artificial heart was fully aligned now. The pulse was steady, unwavering. The prince's vitals stabilized completely. Solomon stood up slowly, exhaling a deep breath. He had done it. The child was safe, at least for now. "Is it done?" Mariama asked, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "Yeah," Solomon said softly, his gaze never leaving the child. "It's done." But as the smoke cleared and the reality of the battle settled in, he knew this was just the beginning of the war, and no matter how hard they fought, the zealots would not give up easily. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and ozone. The medical wing was silent now, save for the faint hum of the machines that kept the young prince alive. Solomon stood amid the wreckage, his body aching, his thoughts clouded by exhaustion. The monitors glowed faintly in the dim light, each pulse of the child's synthetic heart a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Mariama leaned against a console, her breathing ragged. "We did it," she said softly, her voice laced with disbelief. "He's alive." Solomon didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the rhythmic pulse of the holographic readout. Each beat steadied his nerves just a little, but his mind refused to rest. "Alive," he murmured finally. "But at what cost?" Thalok stood near the doorway, his armor cracked and his weapon scorched. His expression was unreadable. "You saved my son," he said. "That is the only truth that matters." Solomon turned toward him, his brow furrowed. "Your people might not see it that way. They came here to destroy him, and us." Thalok's jaw tightened. "They are afraid. The council will claim control now. The zealots will scatter, but their faith runs deep. They will not forgive this easily." Mariama rubbed her temples. "Then what happens next? We can't stay here. You said they won't stop." "They won't," Thalok admitted, "but they also can't deny what has been done. My son's survival will spread across the system by dawn. It will divide them. Some will see this as heresy, others as hope." Solomon let out a slow breath. "Hope can be dangerous." Thalok gave a faint smile. "So can truth." The faint hum of the heart monitor filled the silence that followed. Solomon's gaze softened as he looked at the sleeping child, his small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Against all odds, the creation had worked. The artificial heart had bonded not just with the boy's body, but with the core itself. It was no longer just human technology. It was something new, something born of both worlds. Mariama broke the silence. "We should go before more of them come." Thalok nodded. "There's a passage beneath the medical wing. It leads to the lower transport decks. I can get you both out before sunrise." Solomon shook his head. "I'm not leaving the prince." Thalok's eyes narrowed. "If you stay, they'll kill you. You've done enough." "I haven't," Solomon said, his voice steady. "If they find a way to corrupt the core again, it could destroy the connection we built. I have to make sure it holds." Mariama stepped forward, frustration flickering across her face. "Solomon, listen to yourself. You can't fight all of Xantar alone." He met her gaze, his tone calm but resolute. "Maybe not. But I didn't come this far to run away when it matters most." Thalok regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I'll stand with you, whatever comes." Mariama sighed, shaking her head but smiling faintly. "You two are the most stubborn beings I've ever met." The faintest sound broke the tension, the soft intake of breath. Solomon turned sharply toward the child. The prince's eyes fluttered open, silver light reflecting in their depths. His voice was faint, trembling. "Father." Thalak froze, disbelief flashing across his face. "Kyle." The child's small hand reached toward him. "I heard the music," he whispered. "It was warm." Solomon swallowed hard. "He's conscious. The core's resonance must have stabilized." Thalak knelt beside the bed, his massive form trembling. "You're safe, my son. You're safe." Cale's gaze shifted toward Solomon. "You made the music," he said weakly. "You made it beat." Solomon felt something tighten in his chest. "No," he said softly. "You did. I just gave it a rhythm." Mariama wiped at her eyes, a small incredulous laugh escaping her lips. "The universe is going to have a lot to say about this." Thalak looked at Solomon, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Whatever comes, know this. Your name will live among my people. Whether as a savior or a heretic, only time will decide." Solomon smiled faintly. "As long as he lives, I can live with either." Outside, faint tremors echoed through the structure, the sound of engines, movement, the shifting of power. Solomon turned his gaze back to the prince, the faint hum of the artificial heart filling the air once more. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he allowed himself to breathe, but deep down, he knew peace was only temporary. Something greater was coming, and it would demand everything he had left to give. The first light of dawn spilled across the Xantar skyline, painting the metallic towers in hues of gold and amber. The city, once filled with unrest, now felt eerily still, like a world holding its breath. Inside the quiet medical wing, the hum of the machines continued, steady and serene. The sound had become more than mechanical. It was alive, carrying the rhythm of two worlds bound by a single heartbeat. Dr. Solomon Adeyemi sat in silence beside the child's bed, his hands clasped loosely together. His eyes were tired but focused, his expression a mix of awe and reflection. The prince, Kyle, slept peacefully, the glow of his veins pulsing in perfect harmony with the core pulse. The artificial heart had not only survived the night, it had become something more. It was no longer just human ingenuity or Xantar divinity. It was both. Mariama approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the floor. "You should rest," she said gently. "You've done everything you could." Solomon shook his head. "Not yet," he murmured. "I want to see what happens when he wakes. I need to know if the connection holds on its own." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who doesn't trust his own miracle." He gave a weary laugh. "Maybe I don't trust miracles. I've learned they always come with a price." Thalak entered the room, his towering frame casting a long shadow. He looked at Solomon with a mixture of respect and sorrow. "The council has spoken," he said. "They cannot ignore what you've done. The prince lives and the core remains stable. They will not move against you for now." Solomon studied him carefully. "For now." Thalak nodded. "There are still those who call it blasphemy. They fear what they do not understand. They always will." Mariama crossed her arms. "Then let them fear. Fear changes nothing about the truth." Thalak's gaze softened. "Perhaps, but fear drives men to desperate acts. The council has ordered that the prince be kept under protection until the core stabilizes completely. You've created something that binds two species, Doctor. Some will see unity. Others will see contamination." Solomon's eyes drifted back to the boy. "It doesn't matter what they see. What matters is that he lives." "That's all I ever wanted." Thalak's voice lowered. "And what of you? When they come to claim their control again, will you stand and fight? Or will you leave while you still can?" "I'm not leaving," Solomon said simply. "I didn't come here to save just one life. I came to prove that compassion doesn't have boundaries." For a long moment, Thalak said nothing. Then he placed a massive hand on Solomon's shoulder. "You've done more than that, Doctor. You've changed the rhythm of two hearts, the core's and mine." A soft, rhythmic sound filled the silence. Kyle stirred, his small hand twitching before his eyes fluttered open. The faint silver glow of his pupils reflected the soft light of morning. "Father," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "It's quiet now." Thalak knelt beside him, his voice trembling. "Yes, my son, the storm has passed." Kyle's gaze shifted to Solomon. "The music, it's still there." Solomon smiled gently. "You can hear it?" Kyle nodded slowly. "It feels warm." Solomon felt his throat tighten. "Then it's working. You're in tune with the core now. You always will be." Mariama exhaled softly. "He's stable. Truly stable." Thalak looked at Solomon with gratitude that words couldn't capture. "What will you do now?" Solomon leaned back in his chair, his expression distant but calm. "There's still work to be done. Humanity has a lot to learn about balance. So do the Xantar. Maybe this," he nodded toward the child, "is where that learning begins." Thalak bowed his head slightly. "If the gods still listen, they've chosen you as their messenger." Solomon smiled faintly. "I'm no messenger, just a man who refused to let a child die." The prince's heartbeat filled the room, steady, alive, and impossibly harmonious. The rhythm was not just mechanical or spiritual, it was something new, something shared. As the first rays of sunlight spilled across the bed, Solomon closed his eyes, listening. The sound of the heart merged with the faint hum of the core far beneath the city. Two rhythms, one born of earth, the other of Xantar, beating together as one. He let the sound wash over him, a symbol of everything he had fought for. It wasn't victory, it wasn't glory, it was understanding. For the first time in generations, two worlds shared the same pulse. And somewhere deep in that sound, in that fragile, steady heartbeat, humanity had finally found its place among the stars.